He says hell exists and they survive to prove it. We're not talking about made-up horror stories, but the harsh reality experienced by survivors of the most brutal prisons in the world. Have you ever imagined what it's like to spend days, weeks, or even years in places where overcrowding, violence, and corruption are so intense that survival becomes a daily struggle? Well, these stories reveal curious facts and historical truths that few dare to share. In this video, we'll dive deep into these accounts, uncovering mysteries hidden behind the walls of these prisons and how ordinary people faced extreme situations. From total lack of control to isolation that eats away at the mind. Get ready to discover what happens when justice turns into a real nightmare, and understand why these survivors insist on telling the truth, no matter how shocking it may be. Would you like me to adjust anything, or is this good as is? Arthur Road Jail, India. The hell of overcrowding and corruption. Imagine being locked inside a tiny cell so crowded that over 50 men barely have enough room to lie down. They end up sleeping standing up. This was the harsh and cruel reality for Rahul Sharma, a man arrested for theft in Mumbai, India, who was thrown into Arthur Road Jail. This prison is infamous for its extreme overcrowding and the constant fear that fills the air. But what made it even worse wasn't just the rival gangs fighting inside. It was the total absence of control or order. There was no warden properly managing the prison, and guards were either overwhelmed or corrupt, allowing chaos to rule. Inside this hellish environment, money was a strange kind of power. Rahul saw firsthand how inmates would bribe the guards to stay safe from the violent gangs that controlled entire sections of the jail. It was a survival tactic. Pay up or risk getting caught in gang conflicts. Food was scarce and barely enough to fill a stomach, while the water was often dirty and contaminated, making drinking a gamble that could lead to illness. Because of these dangers, Rahul spent weeks pretending to be sick just to avoid stepping out of his overcrowded cell, where violence was always a threat lurking around the corner. This fact is a clear example of how brutal prison life can be, and it's one of the many curious and troubling realities hidden behind bars. The overcrowding meant that people from all walks of crime, from petty thieves to hardened gangsters, were forced to live shoulder to shoulder in cramped cells, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and fear. Privacy was non-existent, and personal safety was a constant worry. It's almost unbelievable how such a place exists while life outside goes on without much notice. The prison has become a symbol of neglect and corruption, a dark chapter in India's criminal justice system, filled with chilling historical facts and mysteries about human endurance. Rahul's story is just a glimpse into this cruel world, and it sets the stage for what comes next. A prison where silence is the most torturous punishment of all. Thomas Silverstein was one of the most dangerous and feared prisoners in the United States. He spent decades practically alone in ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison known as the Prison of No Return. Imagine spending up to 23 hours a day locked in a tiny cell, barely seeing or speaking to anyone else. For Thomas, this experience was like a slow death without a coffin. The absolute silence and total isolation are the greatest tortures there. It's curious how a place without direct physical violence can be so cruel because loneliness affects the human mind much more than people imagine. He said that to avoid going crazy, he started talking to the walls, just to remind himself that he was still alive. The routine at ADX Florence is always the same, a true cycle of monotony and suffering. Prisoners are allowed to leave their cells only 1 hour a day for exercise, but it's solitary exercise, inside a small cage, always under tight supervision by 2 guards. There is no space for socializing, friendship, or any real human contact. Food is delivered inside the cells, and inmates barely move or have any stimulus beyond the emptiness around them. This strict routine makes the days feel endless and heavy, and time drags as if it were trapped too. The interesting thing is that, even though it seems less violent than other prisons, the mental wear is immense because the lack of contact causes many to lose hope for any future. That's why ADX Florence is considered a true hell for those inside. The prison is designed to keep under control the most dangerous and violent inmates who in other places could cause chaos or even death. Security is maximum, and any attempt at resistance is met with harsh punishment. But even without constant physical violence, prolonged isolation becomes a cruel form of psychological torture. Thomas Silverstein, in his letters before he died, called the prison a slow death without a coffin. And if you think this is the worst part of the story, wait until you learn about the next place, where chaos and constant war between groups of inmates turn life into a daily battle. La Modelo in Colombia is no ordinary prison. It's almost a battlefield. Carlos Velázquez, who was once a police officer and later became an inmate there, describes the situation inside as being caught between guerrilla fighters and paramilitaries. Imagine this. The two sides occupy separate wings, like rival armies within the same territory, each with their own rules and leaders. The central courtyard acts as a kind of no man's land, but it's charged with tension because any provocation can quickly explode into violence. Carlos recalls a terrible day when a dismembered body was left in the middle of the courtyard as a warning to everyone. A brutal and clear message of what happens when you step out of line. Life inside is not for the weak. Carlos had to hide his true identity to survive. If the gang leaders found out who he really was, he knew he would be killed fast. And it wasn't just the overt violence he had to avoid. Constant fear, paranoia, and the heavy atmosphere of unseen threats made anyone's mind spin. The situation gets even worse because most inmates have access to weapons, conduct military-style training, and even run businesses inside the prison, all without the heavily armed guards being able to intervene directly. The curious fact here is that despite the chaos, the prison system works like a mini-society with its own laws, where a single wrong step can mean death. But the worst part happens in the so-called no man's land, the area between the two rival wings. No prisoner controls it, and violence there is so extreme that even the guards don't enter. This is where many battles start, causing dozens of deaths in conflicts like the one in 2000, when a fragile peace was shattered by the discovery of a paramilitary leader's corpse. The prison is known for its overcrowding and poor conditions, with a justice system almost non-existent behind its walls. And even with all these atrocities, La Modelo remains a harsh reality and a reflection of the wars that ravage Colombia outside its walls. And if you think you've seen enough horror, wait until you hear what happens at Camp 14 in North Korea. Camp 14, North Korea. Born a prisoner, living like a ghost. Imagine being born in a place where your life is already condemned before it even begins. Shin Dong-hyuk is one of the very few who managed to escape Camp 14, North Korea's most feared prison, where people are treated not as humans but as slave labor machines. Since childhood, he was forced to work up to 18 hours a day under brutal conditions, and he even had to betray his own mother to survive. To grasp this reality, just think about living in a factory without rest, without childhood, without freedom. A dark mystery for anyone who has never been through it. What's both shocking and strangely curious is how these prisoners are treated as if they have no value at all. The food is so scarce that many resort to hunting rats, snakes, and insects just to avoid starving, something that is, of course, forbidden and harshly punished. Executions are carried out publicly as a warning, and inmates live under a constant threat far beyond what most can imagine. Shin's account reveals cruel historical facts, showing that this place is not just a prison but a factory of suffering and death disguised as political punishment. This scenario makes us reflect on the mysteries of absolute power and systematic dehumanization. In a place where even children are forced to work and education is a form of indoctrination, survival itself is a victory. Shin Dong-hyuk managed to escape and tell his story, but most never leave. It is a parallel world where hope is almost non-existent and reality surpasses anything we could imagine. And if at ADX Florence the torture is silence, at Camp 14 the torture is forced labor until the end, with life stolen from the very beginning. El Salvador. A black hole of human rights. Luis Fernando was one of many who were arrested without trial during gang crackdowns in the United States and sent to a massive prison in El Salvador called Sisoti. Imagine sharing a cell with 150 men and having only 2 toilets for all of them. The lights never went off, making it almost impossible to get any sleep. The only comfort they had was a Bible, handed out as if it were the only mental escape in that constant darkness. It's curious how, even amidst chaos, a small piece of paper like that can mean some hope for someone living day by day behind those walls. What Luis Fernando remembers most isn't just the physical conditions, but the atmosphere of fear and injustice. Many inmates were beaten for no reason, and he himself spent 15 days in solitary confinement after complaining about the food. There were no clear rules, only one rule: survive no matter what the cost. And there, between cold walls and low voices, human rights seemed to disappear completely. The feeling of being trapped in a black hole where no one sees what happens is strong. This is one of the darkest mysteries of the modern prison system. How can someone be removed from society and simply forgotten? Besides the extreme overcrowding, COT's security is reinforced in an almost impenetrable way. But the truth is that prisoners endure cruel isolation. There are no visits, very little contact with the outside world, and constant surveillance turns life into a daily psychological torture. Often, the stories from these places are left aside, but the truth is that these historical facts about the prison are part of a larger puzzle about rights, justice, and what it really means to punish someone. Curious, isn't it? Like in many of these places, the line between justice and torture easily blurs, and those who live it know the worst sentence might not be the time behind bars, but being forgotten by the world. The truth about the world's most brutal prisons is harsh, cruel, and often hidden. After hearing real stories from survivors who faced the worst of the worst, it becomes impossible to ignore the mysteries and historical facts revealing a system that is often inhumane and deeply flawed. Have you ever stopped to think, how do these people manage to survive? What is missing for these atrocities to be truly fought? Now, I ask you, do you think these prisons reflect what justice should be? Or are we facing a reality that urgently needs to change? Want to keep discovering shocking stories and curiosities that few know about? Then don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with content that will challenge everything you think you know. After all, we learn much more when we open our eyes to what's beyond the bars. Let's uncover these mysteries together and bring to light the voices that have been silenced for so long.